right. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome. I'm Jen Field, Director of Social Impact here at GLG, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. Extra special welcome to the Social Impact Fellows in the front row, and welcome to those of you in the overflow room. Apparently you have to show up early to social impact events, so sorry there wasn't room for everybody in here. So as you know, we are a company committed to creating a purpose-driven workplace, and we do that through our social impact umbrella in two primary ways. And the first is deploying our people as forces for good in the communities in which we work and live through service days. And the second is through deploying our product, working with social impact clients, nonprofits, social enterprises, connecting them to council members to increase their impact. So we're here tonight to celebrate that commitment. And we're going to do that through a series of conversations because we are, after all, a business built on conversations. So for the first conversation, it is my pleasure to invite up two Pauls. One you heard from earlier, our brand new CEO, Todd. And the second, I imagine you hear from quite often, Paul Ciraolo, Managing Director, Head of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Come on up. All right. Thank you both for being here.
It's great to be here.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
In
Can I
this first,
stop you, Jen? So
please.
before we start, I can't resist the opportunity to jump in. I actually have something for you because I happen to know
You heard.
it's Jen's birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Jen.
That's hilarious.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, Paul. I actually saw this and I wondered who it was for.
Whose
That
birthday
is
is
not
it?
where
There
my
you go.
mind is today. Thank you. I'll have that after this
Now we're
session.
going to see if I've thrown you off your game and you can
I'm
kinda,
blushing a little bit, but
yeah.
thank you. All right, well, other than my birthday, and thank you all for coming to my birthday party, we are going to have, this first conversation is going to be about why our company invests in social impact and service, and about what we do. So just to set the scene for a moment, GLG has been embracing this work since the earliest days of the company. It's our 20-year anniversary this year. We made a decision to make a formal investment in this work 5.5 years ago with the establishment of the social impact practice and the formalization of our service days efforts. And when I talk about why we do this work, I like to use the term shared value, which is a management approach that says, let's maximize value for all of our stakeholders. And there's a lot of data that shows that companies that do that consider all of their stakeholders, not just their financial shareholders, actually outperform their peers in the long run. So through our social impact work, we think about three key stakeholder groups. The first is our council members, whom we connect to our social impact clients being nonprofits, social enterprises, foundations, impact investors. And our council members routinely tell us that it can change their experience with GLG from what can be an economic transaction, consulting with an investor, to a really personal, meaningful, deeper engagement when they're sharing their unique skills and experiences with someone who's using them, applying them for a social good. So the first stakeholder group would be council members. The second can be our clients. Oftentimes our clients are curious about our social impact practice if they know about it. Oftentimes they want to talk about their own philanthropic initiatives. They'll refer fellows and clients to us. And the third is our employees. And we've learned about millennials that they want to feel connected to their workplace, not just millennials. I'm older than millennial. Unfortunately, it's my birthday today.
I'm a millennial.
But we do hear that people want to feel connected to their workplace in a personal way. So as I said, what we do is deploying our product through our social impact work and deploying our people in the communities in which we work and live. So over to you guys, and Paul, Todd, I'll start with the first question for you, which is, in your experience, why, in your opinion, do you think it's important for business to invest in this type of work?
Okay. Well, there's so many different reasons for us to invest. I think maybe I'll start at the very highest level and then we can get more specific. I think there's been a change over the last, that I observe over the last 10, 20 years that's accelerated rapidly, I think, in the last few years, which is that there's been a shift in expectations of where values get expressed in society. And I think historically people looked to politicians to express values and to kind of take a lead on values. Increasingly, they're looking at businesses to actually hold those values up and express and live those values. And I think gone are the days where you can say, you know, we're just a business and we're separate from society and the impact we have on society. That doesn't fly anymore. Nobody buys that. Nobody believes that. And therefore, everybody expects you to have a position on the values that matter to you as a business, as a you know, back to your point about the purpose-driven culture. People expect to see that purpose brought to life in their day-to-day experiences, but in investments like this that take the product and make it real in a value sense, in a visceral sense, for the stakeholders that you mentioned, the employees in particular, who I think now have an expectation. And I haven't done a random poll, but I'm guessing that most people around the room expect, wherever they're working, to have values that they feel connected to and proud of, that you can kind of go home and say, hey, yeah, I feel good about where we work because we're investing in these areas. So maybe I'll stop there for a second, but I think at the highest level, it's because we have to. It is an expectation, and people are relying more on businesses to do that, which is a whole different kind of, there's a whole bunch of other knock-on effects of that, but there is an expectation, and we have no choice other than to embrace that and to be honest about the values that define who we are.
Yeah, thank you. You hear that a lot about can be a culture thing. Paul, I'd love, maybe it's a good segue for you to talk a little bit about service specifically, which the London office has really been embracing for several years now. Talk about maybe what the office is doing with respect to service and about any impact you've seen on the culture here.
Yeah, sure. We've really grown our service activities over the past few years, thanks in a large part to very committed team members like Nick Scott, who you'll be, among others, who you'll be hearing from later on this evening. You know, I hear a lot from colleagues that, you know, some of the highlights of their participation is not only, you know, doing good for the community, but also gives them an opportunity to meet, you know, fellow colleagues outside of the office and get to know them, which has really been great. You know, I think, you know, our team has been, you know, very involved in, you know, many other, well, actually, we ran a survey about a little over a month ago, and thanks to everyone who participated in that. And I think what we learned from that is just how committed everyone is to, you know, service and social impact in this region. 85% of the respondents, of those that responded, had participated in an activity in the past 12 months, and 97% of respondents basically confirmed just how important it is that GLG is involved in social impact. So that was good to see. And outside the office, I mean, people are, you know, involved in quite a lot of activities on their own, Relay for Life, you know, various cancer charities, you know, and multiple others.
Yeah, great. Paul, Todd,
T.
sorry.
Paul T. Yeah. Call me Bob.
Now that we know that you're committed to this type of work, to businesses doing this type of work, do you have any thoughts to share with the group on what is exciting to you about GLG's take on this work, about what we do here?
So yes, I do, and maybe if you'll forgive me, I'll go back to my eBay days, the last kind of, you know, place I worked where we tried to do a similar thing, and I'll describe what we do there and then how I think it applies to GLG and why I think there's a deeper opportunity for us at GLG to do things. And it's on the second of the two things you articulated. One was the service days. The second was using our product directly to impact kind of society in positive ways. And one of the things we did at eBay was, we live in times in the last few years where a lot of people, understandably and correctly, I think, feel alienated from technology and from globalization and the kind of the impact that that's having, or they perceive that is happening around the world. And we were kind of conscious of that at eBay, and we felt that we were a force for good actually in connecting people to the benefits of technology and globalization, so they can participate in the positive things that those bring, rather than some of the perceived negative consequences. One of the things we did was we worked in a number of cities across Europe. We worked in Diepholz and Mönchengladbach in Germany. which reminds me of, who remember Bayern Mönchengladbach, that great football, to forget it. Anyway, kind of Mönchengladbach, and L'Aquila in Italy, which had an earthquake and destroyed a lot of the kind of the economic vibrancy of the area. And the idea was we worked with areas where the economy wasn't so great, and they were struggling, and they certainly weren't feeling the benefits of technology and globalization helping them. And so we literally got a team to go in and work with the local people to bring them online. Right, to say, and we worked with local businesses that were struggling, didn't have a large enough market in their local kind of environment, and we said, hey, here's how you kind of get all of your inventory online. Here's how you reach a larger audience. Here's how you market yourselves through our platform, and here's how you grow the business. And I have numerous examples of people that turned their life around. Frank Bruguera, who's one guy that owned a motorcycle parts business in Spain. He was a massive Harley Davidson fan, for better or worse, and he knew it inside out. He was going to go bust, and we kind of brought him online, and he's grown his business to the point where he's had to employ 6 people to handle the queries that he gets, and he's an expert, and people come to him for advice through the platform and connect. And again, for me at eBay, it was like, that's what it is about. That's the positive role we can play in the world, and we're bringing the benefits of what we represent to bear on local communities, and it felt really good. If I bridge now into GLG, the opportunity feels to me way more direct and way more personal and visceral, right? So we were limited by e-commerce and the benefits that e-commerce can have, which I think can be beneficial, but it's one area. We can actually kind of turn our product to help in any number of areas for social good. I actually kind of can't think of the limit on areas where we could apply the capability that we have as a force for good in society. And so I know we've got some speakers tonight that are going to talk about a few of those. But again, it's like the problem we have, as I mentioned this morning in GLG, is like choosing from all the great opportunities we have as a business. I think we face the same problem in social impact. Where is the place that we personally want to have the greatest impact and do the most good? Because I think we can have impact in any number of areas.
Well, thank you for that answer, and that's one of the reasons I think why the fellowship has gotten so competitive.
Right.
We haven't had an opportunity to tell you that, but we had over 550 applications last year for 6 spots, and we made it application based because we wanted to have diversity of areas in which the fellows are operating, and we want to know that we're working with the people who can leverage us in the most tactical, strategic, the best way to be the most impactful.
Right.
So thank you for that response. Paul, that's another great segue. If you can talk a little bit about, we have a London fellow now, Josh MacAlister. Thank you, Josh, for being with us. You guys will all hear from Josh momentarily. So now we are using our product to benefit a London-based nonprofit. If you can share a little bit about that, it'd be great.
Yeah, sure. We started working with Josh last year. Josh is the founder and CEO of Frontline, which helps train graduates and career changers to do social work, and really has a positive impact for a lot of kids. Some of the stuff we've done are engagement strategy and internal communications as the business scales. We're working on coaching models, voluntary coaching models, and I think we're even working on how to develop effective podcasts. We've done quite a lot, and we look forward to scaling this a lot more under Paul's leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we have a packed program. Any kind of final words on this before we turn to our next?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I would call out is the opportunity for individuals to get involved. So again, in the programs that I described at eBay, it was the eBay team that did that, right? It was kind of like, we kind of, used our tools and kind of helped people connect, and it was the eBay team that did that.
Did you actually travel to those locations
Yes.
too? Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. So we had teams that went out, spent time with the businesses, literally went through their inventory, helped them get it online. And part of it was learning for us, which is, hey, how do we help these businesses come online? Like, how do we play a role in society?
So you were, sorry, I'm interrupted. So you were working on your own skills at the same time.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it was the perfect combination. It was like helping us think, hey, this is something we need to do for our business. The more businesses like this that we can bring online, the better our proposition is. Like because these guys had great inventory, but it's locked in Mönchengladbach and it's locked in L'Aquila and it's locked in these kind of places that people don't have access to. We make that accessible. It makes our business more interesting. It makes our business better. And we're having a positive benefit on those, and for those that don't know, the engine of economic growth in Europe certainly is mid-sized businesses. It's not large businesses, right? They employ a lot of people, but it's mid-sized businesses that actually drive economic growth. So by empowering that, and the team then get a visceral sense that, oh shit, we're making a difference for people on the ground. This guy is now employing 6 more people than he did. You multiply that by 500,000 small businesses, you can start to see the impact you can have at scale. And again, we have a platform. We have 600,000, 700,000 council members. We have incredible scale and therefore the ability to impact the kind of society on an incredibly broad scale.
Awesome. Well, both Pauls, I look forward to working with you in the future.
Definitely.
Thank you again for joining us. Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jen.
Jen.
Thank you.
All right. For our second conversation, I'm delighted to invite up now Melinda Wolf, our Global Head of HR, Nick Scott, Senior Team Leader, and Florence Walsh, Research Manager. Thank you guys for being here. Melinda, I just want to make sure you know where we are, what time zone we're in.
I do. I know what city we're in.
I learned that Melinda's in New York 4 days in the month of April.
No, Paul just extended that time. I'm now there 5 more days.
Okay, great. Well, I'm relieved. Welcome to London.
Thank you.
And we are just going to talk a little bit more deeply now about our work in service and in deploying our product. But Melinda, starting with you, in your role as Global Head of HR and in your experience prior to GLG, why do you think it's important for a company to offer both tracks of service and impact?
Yeah, it's a great question because they're very different, and people get all sorts of different things out of them. And I think you'll hear that when you start to hear your own colleagues talk about this. I think that this is really essential to our culture. I think it's essential to who we are as a company. And I would just say that for me, it was one of the key attractors, and I'm not even a millennial by far, okay? But I think, when you talk about service, you talk about a couple of things. Number one, when you do service work, besides the actual just personal deep reward of doing it, you get to know all sorts of other people from the company. Great thing, because we are a company, unfortunately, oftentimes of silos, and this really helps to break down those silos. You get the benefit of really collaborating, and having done this at other places where in Habitat for Humanity we were building homes or doing other things, and I had no idea how to use certain tools or do certain things. Asking people and getting advice and doing it together is just something that you don't always feel comfortable with in the workplace, but you do that outside and then you bring it in and it's a great thing. And then finally and importantly, you get the opportunity to be a leader. And we should all be leaders, whether we're individual contributors or whether we're leading teams, but you get to practice that and do it outside of the office, and I think that's really important. So the service stuff to me is just an easy win for value in the community and value for us, etc. On the other side, I think that the work we do on social impact is hugely important for engagement of our people in all sorts of other ways. But I will just say this, for me, and I am very involved in the nonprofit world personally. I'm on the boards of various organizations. I'm chair of a board of a small organization. It's been my best learning of anything that I've ever done. If you have never done a strategic plan in your work and you are not in a job where you do strategic thinking, doing a strategic plan for a nonprofit is a great way to learn a set of skills. If you've never done recruiting or actually job descriptions or thinking about who the right people are for roles. When you run a nonprofit and you're on the board and you have to find a new executive director or whatever, you're using a whole new set of skills. So I just want to say that I think this is not only important in terms of what we do for our communities and what these wonderful people are doing for our communities, but really helping all of you do what you keep on asking about, which you can do in all sorts of ways. Develop your careers. Develop your careers by using nonprofit as a wonderful way of doing it. So I hope that answers your
Great.
question.
Thank you, Melinda. So Nick, I'm going to ask you to talk for a minute about service, and you've, as Paul mentioned, done so much to build those opportunities here. Can you tell us about what it was when you joined and what it is now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined GLG 4 years ago, and back then we worked in a significantly smaller office with a significantly smaller workforce. And I think back then it was maybe 5 annual service day teams were sent forth to work with 2 charity partners, kind of on the grounds, local grassroots charities in London. Fast forward 4 years, and it's now 200 colleagues, 30 service day teams, 6 or 7 charity partners, and it's seriously impressive work. It's turned into a scalable machine where I have to say it's due to the fantastic leadership of the service day captains. It's due to colleagues that have taken on leadership roles over and above their day jobs, including Dieter Hoffman and Caroline Gabino, who are absolutely critical in helping to organise such a volume of charity days out each year. I think it's also worth noting, over the course of the last 4 years, our relationships with some of these charities has really deepened. We now routinely feature in the annual reports of 2 of the charity partners we work with, which is the West London Action for Children and the C4WS Homeless Charity that we work with on a monthly basis, which is, you know, fantastic. I would say, from Paul's point earlier about having run the survey last month and the data that came off that, you know, I'm not surprised that 97% of people say that the service is important to them. I think the one thing that hasn't changed, you know, from 4 years ago to now is kind of how important commitment to service is to GLG is in the London office. It's something we always swap stories about and kind of talk to other colleagues that are travelling through the London office about what they've been doing for their service day that year.
Awesome. Well, Nick, we rely on you and some others, so thank you for everything you've done. Florence, you're working with Josh and his team. It would be great if you can share with us why you wanted to get involved with working with social impact and with Josh specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I joined GLG, throughout my time at university and for a year afterwards, I worked as a part-time care or social worker. I worked with an adult who had very complex physical and emotional needs. And I recognised a couple of things. One of them was the challenges that come with the job, and another being the rewards. And when I heard about Frontline specifically, I was really keen to get involved with an organisation that was encouraging young people to pursue this as a career. And I think to tie into Nick's point, I ran as a service day captain for a couple of years with 2 charities, one of them called The Passage, where we still run employability workshops, and another organisation called Young Roots for refugees. And I really wanted to continue that work, but in my sort of 9-to-5 job. And when I heard about social impact and being able to utilise the skills that I've learned and use the GLG product, I was really keen to get involved. And I partner with my colleagues Avanti, Bryony and Mariam, all on the corporate team. So we've got a nice sort of teamwork thing going on. And I've been really excited to get involved.
Awesome. Thank you. A couple more questions for all of you. Melinda, do you have any, you referenced some personal experiences in service and skills-based volunteerism. Are there any that stand out as examples to share?
You know, one example that I would just share is just a little bit of a story, which is, you know, I'm kind of the geek out person who does service trips for my vacation. So I last year in January, before I came to GLG, I was in Senegal, and I went to visit a wonderful nonprofit called Tostan. And while we were there, we decided to go visit another nonprofit, which my husband was a little bit involved with. It was called MyAgro. And so we left where we were in Dakar. We went to a different town. We visited this amazing nonprofit that was providing farmers opportunities to actually plan and pay for the cultivation of their crops over time. And it was a really unusual model, really fascinating, like the 1 Acre Fund, which is in another part of Africa. So I just loved it, and I loved meeting the woman who led it, and I was so moved by it and thought it was so interesting. And then I came back, and I was in the interviewing process here, and I came to GLG, and the social impact team sat down with me and said, oh, and we want to review one of all of the people that we were looking at and kind of give me some background. And lo and behold, the person that I'd gone to visit in Senegal was one of our social impact fellows. And it was like, oh, I have come to the right place. You know, it just felt so great to be part of that. But I would say there are loads and loads of experiences I have in my nonprofits. I referenced them earlier. I'm on, nominating committees. I have to look for board development. I do all sorts of things in all sorts of organizations, and I really think they make me better at what I do in life. And it's time consuming, and most people say, when do you do it? And I spend a lot of my time on weekends working it. But like all of the people you're hearing from who are really inspiring here, it's so worth doing this work because it's gratifying. You're making a difference in the world, and you're able to know and learn so much more. So I'm just a big fan of this stuff.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Florence, going back to you for a minute, what has been a highlight of working with Josh and the Frontline team till now?
So one of the biggest highlights has actually been in the last couple of weeks. One of Josh's team came to me and said they wanted to run a podcast that was informative about social work, but also entertaining to encourage young people to get involved in social work as a career. And we sort of brainstormed some ideas of podcasts that have done this really well. And one of them was The Guilty Feminist. I don't know if anyone here has listened to it. But I was very excited because I'm the biggest fangirl of Deborah Francis White, who runs it. She's a comedian. And she essentially has this weekly podcast where she brings other comedians to talk about really important topics which impact women every day. So gender pay gap, the impact of negative advertising, body image. And it kind of gave me an excuse to stalk her on the internet. And I managed to find her. And my colleague Mariam has a video of me getting off the phone with her and almost crying with excitement. But we managed to connect the producer of the show, Tom Skalinski, with the Frontline team on Friday. And I was really excited that we managed to make that introduction with someone who's done something so successful and offer some really invaluable advice to do something so great.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that anecdote. Nick, any closing comments for our panel on service? Anything you've seen impacting the office here in London?
I would reiterate what Linda was saying around our commitment to service. It's very much kind of part of who we are. I often spend a fair amount of time talking even with clients about social occasions and lunches and dinners and the such about the different service days and the different activities that we get involved in. And kind of with that in mind, it's often the case that even in interviews of candidates applying for GLG, they already are aware that we have a commitment to service, and they ask questions about the different activities that we take part in. Plus, kind of on the other side, even colleagues departing the firm often highlight in their exit interviews one of the main things they're actually going to miss about GLG is our commitment to service and the fact that we take service kind of seriously. So just in kind of regards to that, and don't quote me on this, Melinda, and it's not it's not a statistically significant link or a causal relationship of any kind. Just anecdotally, it's incredible to see individual colleagues stepping forward to be service day captains each year. I think that having been here for 4 years, there is a link of the people kind of rising up through leadership positions at the firm and those that took part in leadership of service days kind of earlier on in their career. That being said, it's also the case that even the segment leaders and senior management and team leaders, they're always involved still today. So I'd like to say thank you to everybody that does put forward their time to help lead these teams, and a shameless plug that there's still a couple of spaces left for service day captains this year, so please let me know if you'd like to volunteer.
That's great. Thank you. Melinda.
I just want to say one thing. You will see and be blown away by our fellows. They are amazing. I am really inspired by our colleagues and people here. I just want to say, in addition to it being Jen's birthday, a big thank you to Jen and Rachel Wald for being behind the scenes and really doing all this. So thank you.
With that, I better get off the stage and turn it over now to my partner in crime for social impact, Rachel Wald, and the 3 fellows that are here with us tonight.
Thank you, Jen, and everybody, and Melinda for the shout out. And it is my pleasure to welcome 3 fellows to the stage. Jake, I feel like you're really far away.
Yeah, I'm here.
So before I have you guys introduce yourselves, I'll just say, for those of you who don't know, the fellowship is our flagship social impact program. We run a very competitive selection process each year to find visionary founders of nonprofits and social enterprises that are leading organizations at inflection points where we feel like GLG can be a super critical resource to them succeeding at realizing that vision. And we work with them in a very hands-on way for a period of 2 years at no cost to them. And they use all the products that we offer, although for those of you on the SP team, we haven't quite gotten one cheap enough for us to offer pro bono, but we'll get there. So tonight we're gonna learn a little bit more about the work that these guys do and how we support them. And so maybe each of you, Josh, you could go first, and since we've heard a little bit about you, and just introduce yourselves, what your organizations do, maybe a little of how you got to be doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, sure. Well, Paul stole my best lines of introduction, so I've got a shortcut now to do it again, which is that there are about 500,000 children in England who don't have safe or stable homes, largely because of domestic abuse or substance misuse issues or mental health problems between parents. And for those children, social workers make the world of difference. Great social work can make the world of difference. And Frontline is all about finding great people and getting those great people into social work and doing a really great job of it. So we've got now 5 years in, our 5th cohort starting the programme this year with about 350 new entrants coming into the profession. We'll have our 1,000th social worker in that group, which feels fantastic 5 years in. And it's essentially a 2-year programme at the end of which we want people to either remain deeply committed to social work practice by becoming team managers or future directors, running fantastic services for children and families, or leaving the social work profession and addressing the same underlying issues which affect children suffering from abuse or neglect. And I've been at this for 5 years, and my way into it was through a programme called Teach First, modelled on Teach for America. I left university and taught in secondary schools in Greater Manchester in the northwest, and saw lots of children struggling in school because of what was going on at home. And my dad happened to be a social worker by background. I did Teach First. I was working with children who had social work involvement at home, and about 8 years ago wrote a very naive 500-word article which said we should apply a new approach to get the best top people into social work.
Misan?
Hi everyone, pleasure to be here. My name is Misan Rewane. I'm from Nigeria, and I run an organization called WAVE, which stands for West Africa Vocational Education. And we are tackling the youth unemployment crisis in West Africa that affects over 50 million young people between the ages of 18 to 35. And so how we do this is by finding hardworking young people who are motivated and determined to succeed, screening them into our program where we teach them the required skills to get a good job, start a career, and build a brighter future. And we've been doing this work for 5 years this year as well, so that's kind of exciting as well, and a good reflection and inflection point for us. And one of the things that we're very excited about is how we start to leverage the little base of understanding and experience that we have over the past 5 years to start to influence the bigger ecosystem around how young people in the education system in countries like mine in Nigeria and across Africa are being taught, and how the employment world, how the world of work is receiving them in terms of the attitudes and behaviors of employers. And so just for a bit of context, 90% of the jobs in the formal sector will require a university degree. And 90% of Africans do not have a university degree. And so you're blocking out 90% of your talent simply because we are using the proxies that worldwide are being used increasingly around credentials and work experience, and that's excluding the poorest and most disadvantaged young people. How did I come into this work? I was in strategy consulting, but many decades before that, I wanted to be a teacher. And I remember my parents sort of saying, no, you can't be a teacher. You'll be poor and frustrated. I just remember thinking, well, that's a problem when a young kid is being discouraged from being a teacher. And I made a point of note then that I wanted to fix the education system in my country. And so one way of doing this has really been to understand what's broken about the system by studying the end product, the young people who've already finished school but have 40 years of useful life in them and have pretty much been deemed useless to themselves and to the community because they aren't employable. And so it's been a learning journey over the last 5 years, and really excited to share a bit more about how GLG has helped accelerate us on that learning journey.
We'll get there. Let's have Jake introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jake Wood. I came in from California today, and really happy to be here. I run an organization that I co-founded 8 years ago called Team Rubicon, and what we do is we recruit, train, and deploy primarily military veterans for disaster response and disaster recovery work around the globe and in the United States. So we've got about 75,000 military veterans in our program in the U.S. We also actually have launched affiliates here in the U.K., in Canada, and Australia, working with the military veterans in those respective coalition countries. But what our aim to do is to take the skills and experiences that these men and women have learned from their military, their time in service, and apply those skills and experiences to help people on their worst day, after a disaster, after a humanitarian crisis, and then in turn use that opportunity to serve and to regain that sense of mission, to reinvigorate within those men and women that sense of purpose and that sense of community that they lost when they took off the uniform for the last time and left service. In the United States, about 3 million men and women have served since 9/11 in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Many of them, as they come home and out of war, are experiencing setbacks. Some of them, but certainly not all, are suffering from things like post-traumatic stress. They are looking to get into a workforce that increasingly is looking for credentials that they may not have received while in the military, though they received training that was just as adequate, just with a different diploma or piece of paper on the backside. So that transition's been tough. Likewise, it's probably no secret to most of you, the incidence and cost of disasters worldwide is increasing at a pretty frightening pace, and so we have to come up with new paradigms to address both these challenges, and that's what we're doing. How did I get there? I served in the Marine Corps after I went to university, in the U.S. Marine Corps, obviously. Spent some time overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. I served in an infantry unit and then in a scout sniper team. And one of the great privileges that I had, I served with the Brits in an area of Afghanistan that's, I think, well known to most people in England, in the Helmand Valley, a city called Sangin, which was quite a treacherous place, and many British soldiers lost their lives there. So it was an honor to serve alongside them, and I'm really proud that we have subsequently launched an affiliate here in the UK to engage the men and women from the UK that served alongside us in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Fantastic. Well, there's a lot of places we could go, but Josh, maybe because we've talked a little bit about the work that we've done with Frontline, you could talk about what it means for the families and children that you're working with to have quality social work, and for you guys to multiply that force by 1,000. And can you tell a story that brings to life what quality social work brings to a child's outcomes?
Yeah. So I think social work suffers in the UK from either being totally misunderstood and being confused with social care, care in the community, care for the elderly, which is very important, but a different profession or vocation, if you like. And then sometimes when it is understood, it's understood for the wrong reasons. And lots of you will know Peter Connolly, Baby P in Haringey, and a number of other tragic cases which have become overly associated with the profession writ large. And so very often people don't really get to see or understand what social workers do. We actually made a video which I recommend you watch. We showed it for the first time in this room. It was long enough ago that we were able to get Andrew Adonis and Michael Gove on totally different sides of the Brexit fence to sit right next to each other in the front row. I'm not sure we'll be able to do the same thing today. But essentially it told the story of how social workers need to go into family situations when they are at the moment of greatest crisis. If any of you are parents or could imagine being a parent and having someone knock on the door and say, "Hi, I'm a social worker," there are all sorts of immediate emotional reactions that will go on in that moment. What the social worker needs to do is to hold from that first knock right the way through to not being involved with the family anymore, to competing and slightly contradictory things. One is a great relationship. They need to be able to work with the mum and the dad and the kids, the extended family network, and really understand what's going on and build a rapport where the basis of the relationship is, I'm here to help. And the other thing they need to hold is risk. And they are there as an agent of the state to make sure that the child is living in a sufficiently safe and stable home environment. And so at any time, you need to move back and forth between those two positions. One of the things that social work has suffered from over the last 2 decades has been a drift towards very compliance-driven assessment and referral culture, where social workers will go in, they will spot what's going wrong, they will refer to other agencies, and they'll record it all down. And we think that about 80% of social work time in England at the moment is spent on paperwork. So these are huge problems, structural problems with the way the profession is configured. And so what we're trying to do is train people to be much more relational, go into the family home, refer out as little as possible. You are there as a professional, as a human being, to be of use and of service to the family. So that the type of question you ask mum, the way in which you frame the problem, the way in which you are able to bring advice and guidance into the family network and assess risk, those are the things which are the skill and the value. So Frontline really is part of a much bigger attempt to reform what is a very big, well, it's not a very big public service actually, it's relatively small, but a big profession which has got 30,000 social workers in England working in it. Costs us about £7.5 billion on about 500,000 children. So it's a very expensive, high-end, high-risk system that, when done well, can totally transform lives for children. So that, you know, when we look at educational attainment, involvement with the criminal justice system, we can start to change some pretty negative inequalities that we have become used to living with for too long here in the UK.
Thank you. Jake, you talked about the sort of dual missions of TR, and so maybe you can add a little color to the veterans wellness side and some of the outcomes you're seeing of people you're able to redeploy in this way.
Yeah, so to kind of review it, we're tackling two problems. We're a disaster response organization, and we believe that we can build a better mousetrap and build the best disaster response organization in the world by recruiting the best human capital, and that is, we believe, the men and women who serve their country in uniform and gain that skill and experience. And it was about a year into that effort, back in 2010, going into 2011, when we started to see the impact that we were having on the people who are serving with Team Rubicon in these scenarios. And we were sending people, Haiti earthquake, South Sudan, floods in Pakistan, and they were coming back and they were saying, anecdotally speaking, that they had never felt that way before, that they never thought they would feel that sense of purpose again, that they had everything that they had tried to do since leaving the military had fallen short of what they had gotten out of continued service. And it's really not that different than the panel previously that was talking about the positive impacts that service has for people at GLG. I mean, it just makes you feel better as a human being. But what we quickly learned was that this wasn't just anecdotal, that we could actually measure this, that there were real, measurable, quantifiable biopsychosocial outcomes that were coming from this. Not only was their actual physical health improving with this, not only were they becoming more socially proficient, finding like-minded individuals, once again, who had shared experiences and backgrounds that they could be communal with, but there were actual mental health outcomes that would result. We've started to do some interesting research with academic partners along these lines. We're in the midst of a couple of multi-year longitudinal studies with major research universities in the U.S., determining, how are we improving levels of personal resiliency? How are we developing people along what's called the Connor-Davidson Resilience Index? And all these other different tools that are used that have been proven by academics to measure these outcomes. And interestingly enough, if you put some of these outcomes alongside the outcomes of other types of interventions, whether it's counseling with what we would call like the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have an entire government department dedicated to veterans' health. It's separate than how it's done here in the UK. Other interventions like medication, the outcomes, the behavioral health outcomes are well above and beyond these other types of interventions. And for us, like the stakes are really, really high. I think about there are 3 million men and women in the U.S. that served since 9/11. There are 20 million veterans of all wars in the United States, dating back to World War II. This generation, this 3 million that are post 9/11, they have the opportunity to become real valuable assets in our communities. And at a time when our communities are searching for leadership, at a time when our communities are searching for people who can bridge across divides, these are people who served in multiracial, the most diverse units imaginable, the most diverse institution in the U.S. that learned how to put all those biases aside in the pursuit of mission accomplishment. We can activate that again in our communities, our divided communities, if we empower those individuals on their way home, if we invest in them right now. And this is that crucial moment, because in the next couple of years, they're either going to become those civic assets in our communities, or they're going to fall onto the liability side of that balance sheet. And we have to intervene today. And we see this as kind of one component of that intervention, but it's one that, as Rachel mentioned, we can measure and see those demonstrated outcomes that we're pursuing.
So because in some ways Misan is doing a similar thing, which is tapping into people's potential and connecting them with the opportunity to find purpose and live a complete life, I don't want to get too deep into data, but I know you have some survey results to unveil, and I can't wait. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you think about your programming as a tool for changing the way that employers are thinking about hiring and thinking about people's competency over a university credential.
Yeah, definitely would love to. So we realized a couple of years ago, but it's been a journey for us, and that was sort of pre our GLG application, that the problem that we are tackling is growing at a rate of 11 million young Africans graduating into the workforce every year. And we aren't tackling this urgent and growing problem as quickly as we can. And so we realized that, over the last 4.5 years, going on 5, we've been able to work with just over 200 employer partners and change their mindsets around what to look for when you think about a young person and being inclusive in your hiring. So in our part of the world, inclusion and diversity is less around race, but and also around gender, but it's more around who's getting left behind on a socioeconomic spectrum. And so, one of the things that we came into this conversation with GLG and this opportunity was to think about, well, how do we scale our impact without having to scale up this work that we do directly, setting up more academies, working with employers one by one and changing their hiring attitudes and behaviors. And so this idea around movement building came to birth, and we sat in a room and thought about, well, who's in this education to employment ecosystem? You have the educators, you have the government, you have the young people and their community, and you have the employers. Which of these, if we are able to change their behavior, will sort of create that domino effect and help everyone change? Now, changing government in Africa, it'll take a long time. And so we figured, well, if we change employers' attitudes, and if you can imagine that every job description that you then saw for every top company, think about the same thing here. For every top company, the top 2 bullet points are usually around educational background and relevant work experience. And so it's the same back home. And imagine if the top 2 bullet points were no longer those things, but it was around the skills that you really get screened on when you get to the interview, around teamwork, around problem solving, about creative thinking, critical thinking. If we could change that conversation, then eventually you would have young people demanding of their education system, I want you to teach me those top 2 things on the bullet point. Don't just give me an empty credential. Make sure that I come out of your institution having these things. And so thus begun the work around how do we change employer attitudes. And so our very first conversations were around talking with experts to understand, well, how do you hire for entry-level talent? How do you think about massive application volumes and getting to the heart of what it is that you're looking for? Most people use proxies, but a lot of the bigger companies are now thinking about psychometric assessments and using algorithms to parse through CVs and realize that, yeah, we're working with a lot of small and medium businesses who don't have the resources of a GLG or a Goldman to go through that level of screening. And so what we wanted to do was first to understand employer behaviors globally. And so the survey tool that we just recently worked on was to survey over 200 businesses globally, trying to understand, some of them were owners of businesses, a lot of them were HR directors, HR folks, trying to understand how do you currently hire. And we were hearing the same consistent thing when we are figuring out who to invite to a seat at the table, i.e. the interview, we're mostly using experience. We're looking for competencies measured in the CV, but in general, we're looking for experience and we're looking for credentials as a proxy to tell us if someone has the competencies. And one of the interesting tidbits that came out of it was the average entry-level role is looking for 2 years or more of work experience. So over 50% of the employers we surveyed said they're looking for 2+ years. And I'm like, well, how is someone going to get the 2 years plus experience if you won't give them that chance at the entry level? And so what's been really interesting and a transition for us from this direct work of working one-on-one with employers to having conversations around attitude change more broadly has been sort of removing ourselves from the conversation. So in the past, we would have just surveyed our 275 employers and found out what they did. But we felt that it would be very important to have a global representation of what this problem is and helping Nigerian employers realize you're not alone. Everyone's doing this. We all do it because there's no other proxy that we can think of that's valid as, oh, this other person worked at McKinsey and this person went to this school and this person had a 2-1. Another one of the really interesting questions was when we asked people, think about your top 10% performers in your company. How many of them have a relevant degree? Majority of them do not have a relevant degree. How many of them are in the 80th percentile of academic achievement? Majority of them were not in the academic, they weren't the top 2. So it's really saying what we all know. We all know that person who wasn't qualified but is a rock star and was super competent at the work. How do we then start to put that data in front of the people who care about that? And then how do we take it to say, well, what's the business case for you in terms of better attrition rates, in terms of your top performers don't necessarily look the traditional part? And how do we then offer you an alternative to say, here's some very simple and cheap ways to start screening more inclusively, even when you have 1,000 applications for 550 applications for 6 roles. So that's been really exciting, being able to have this global data that we would normally not have been able to get access to in our.
And how many students have you trained and placed so far?
So directly through our academies, we've graduated over 2,000 young people. Through our partnerships working with governments, we've trained another 2,000 people. And then directly with employers that we've worked with, we've placed over 1,000 young people in entry-level jobs. I was looking forward to the story about one of our students who's gone through the program.
Go
And
for
and
it.
I always tell the story of the same person. I always feel really bad because a third of our team is actually our alumni. And so when I single out this one person to tell his story, it's always a bit, I'm like, oh, I feel bad when I go back to the office and I'm like, but don't you like us? But Frank, I think the reason why I was excited to share his story is that Frank came to our program back in 2013, was visually impaired. And in Nigeria, we don't really have very inclusive labor laws around differently abled people. And so Frank came into our program, and it was a challenge for him to get through our program. We didn't have the capability to train someone with his disability, but we worked around it. We got an iPad that would magnify everything out. We had his teammates being very understanding and helping him with what he couldn't see. And he finished the program, went to work for a financial services firm, which was very important for us to prove to him that he could get a job just like any of his other colleagues in another organization. But he'd always said he wanted to come back to WAVE and work as a trainer. And so he came back to WAVE a year later, worked as a trainer for us for 3 years, got to impact over 700 young people through his time working as a trainer in one of our academies, and very recently, just in January, relocated to the US to get a master's in social work. Yeah. So I was like, I want to tell that story because it's really, really important about how he started to see the impact of working with young people and all the other issues that they bring to the table when they are in that classroom, and how we can be more holistic in solving them.
So Josh, that's one entry to social work. Have you seen any other surprising candidates that come through your program that have really excelled?
Yeah, we've got about half of the people that do the program are new or recent graduates, and then the other half are career changers. So we've got a real mix. Probably some of the more interesting characters. There's a guy who works in North London now. He helped set up London Citizens, which is a big, I don't know if many people are familiar with it, but a big community organisation that does lots of work across London. He's also the vice principal of a further education college and was 58. And was very, very clear that he wanted to spend his last decade of work doing something much more direct and very different, having run a big 16 to 18 college in London. So yeah, we've got a real range of people, and he's absolutely loving the program, and the feedback we get about him from the children and families he works with is amazing.
So it's not just millennials who want purpose in their work?
It's not just millennials.
Jake, you alluded to this earlier, but maybe you could talk about how Team Rubicon stays agile as disaster response becomes more complex and demands more of you guys and more competencies in your toolkit.
Sure. Well, we've scaled quickly. We've got about 110 full-time staff now and about 300 contractors and part-time. And the fear all along would be that we'd become overly bureaucratic and we'd become like the organizations that we're trying to disrupt. And so this has always kind of been the boogeyman, around the corner for us as we've scaled. So, we've tried to do a handful of things really well. We've really focused on culture, trying to take the best of what the military is culturally and apply it internally at the organization. And we talk about it incessantly. 2, we try to build the right systems for the right problems, and again, kind of taking what the military does well, where you have standards, you have procedures for certain rote tasks, but you allow discretion and leadership to really rule the day in the face of big challenges. So we have really invested in our leaders and given them enough flexibility, empowered them to make really, really critical decisions. And if you can imagine, the most chaotic circumstance of, on the face of the earth, whether it's a typhoon hitting the Philippines or Hurricane Harvey hitting the Gulf Coast of the U.S. this past year, you have limited resources, limited information, you have all these complex issues that are coming at you 100 miles an hour, both literally and figuratively. And you can take one of two approaches. You can be overly prescriptive in how you approach that situation, and directives are given from the top, and decisions are made in a very safe environment with stakeholder buy-in all the way up to me. Or you can say, you know what, we've got the best individuals possible on this team. We have the right tools, and we have a culture that's going to guide their decisions in the absence of orders, and we're just going to trust them to make the right call. And we've obviously done the latter. But some things are required in order to do that effectively. You have to have the right people on board. You got to have the right technology tools in place to empower them. They have to be the right tools that are absent of friction in their application. And we've relied on GLG to help us think through a lot of these problems. We've used experts to help us think through some of the technology tools that we've needed. When we were responding to the hurricanes in Texas last year, there was this big concern about some of these oil refineries were being flooded, and it was causing this highly toxic standing water. And we were sending people into these situations, and we immediately had to get on the phone with GLG to get connected with toxicity experts or whatever I don't know. You guys figure that part out for us. Way above my pay grade. But if people are empowered with the right tools, the right information, and then in the right culture, you can stay lean and you can stay efficient, you can stay ultimately flexible in the face of some of those obstacles and that adversity, I guess.
Well, we're really happy to be a small part of that. I'm getting the hook from our production team here. So thank you guys. It's always an honor to share the stage with any of the fellows. Thank you to the Pauls and the other panelists, and to the GLGers in the room who have been supportive of both our community service and social impact efforts. That's going to end our program tonight, but we have a reception in the next room. So stick around and join us. If you have questions for the fellows, they'll be there to mingle as well. And thanks so much.